They always said Cassian Vale was nothing but winter wrapped in human skin. They spoke about him in cold tones, claiming that no warmth lived inside him and no fire could ever take root in his chest. They believed he was incapable of passion or tenderness, certain that any woman who came close to him would only find emptiness instead of comfort. They swore he would never move a woman to tears of desire, never awaken longing, never break his own restraint for love. They were wrong. And on the night when everything finally shattered between him and Mira, she was the one trembling, breathless, holding on to him like the world might disappear if he let go, whispering softly for him not to stop, because what she felt with him was nothing short of life itself. If stories of unexpected love stir your heart, and if you wish to walk along emotions that grow from silence into fire, then stay close to voices like this, subscribe the channel, and allow the bell to guide you whenever another heartbeat is born in story form. The city of Verona stretched along the coastline like a dream caught between history and tomorrow. Waves rolled against stone walls that had seen centuries pass, while glass towers reflected the sky with proud brilliance. Streets wound through markets, hidden cafes, music-filled alleyways, and quiet parks that seemed to hold secrets whispered only at dusk. Mira Langford loved the city more than she loved safety. She was a journalist with restless spirit, a woman who wanted truth even when truth was uncomfortable or dangerous. Mira had never imagined her life would become tied to Cassian Vale. Cassian existed in a world built from silence, control, and precision. People respected him for the empire he created. They feared the stillness he carried. He was known as a man who never lost his temper, never exposed his heart, never allowed chaos to touch him. People called him stone, machine, frost. Anything but human warmth. Many believed he simply did not know how to feel. Mira once believed that too. Their marriage was arranged for everything except love. Her family needed rescue from collapse. His public image needed something softer and more human to balance relentless power. Rings were exchanged like signatures. Vows were spoken like negotiated agreements. No one expected romance. No one expected sparks. People whispered that this marriage was sad, practical, hollow, and destined to remain cold forever. Then Mira walked toward him at the wedding. Light dripped from crystal chandeliers while countless eyes followed every movement. She wore calm on her face because she refused to show fear, yet her heart carried both strength and exhaustion. Cassian stood at the altar like a monument, untouched by the noise of the world around him, until he saw her. Until their eyes met. The composed man the world believed in disappeared for a heartbeat. His eyes changed. They softened without losing depth. They focused entirely on her as though everything else dissolved. It was not the gaze of a man indifferent to his bride. It was not distant. It was thoughtful, searching, unexpectedly warm. Mira felt it. Felt something inside her shift. The distance people spoke of suddenly seemed like an illusion created by people who never truly looked at him this closely. When they signed their marriage register, their fingers brushed. The contact lasted barely a second, but it felt longer. Heat shot through her arm and into her chest. She inhaled sharply. His jaw tightened with subtle tension. He did not pull away too fast nor cling too long, but the moment said enough. Something unseen had awakened. The world thought Cassian Vale could never want a woman. Mira quietly stopped believing those rumors that very day, even if she refused to admit it aloud. The wedding night unfolded differently from how gossip would later imagine. The luxury suite glowed gently beneath golden light. The ocean murmured beyond the walls of glass. The bed stood ready to become a witness to expected consummation. Cassian removed his jacket slowly, his movements precise but strangely thoughtful. His voice entered the silence. Gently. "The bed is yours," he said. "I will sleep on the couch." Mira frowned slightly. She asked, "Why?" Cassian answered simply, "Because I will not touch anything not freely given. I will not claim what you may never wish to offer." He was not refusing out of lack of desire. He was choosing respect. He slept across the room that night, not far and not close, simply present. Mira lay awake far longer than she wanted to. She listened to him breathe. She pictured his restraint. She wondered why the idea of distance no longer felt safe but unbearably lonely instead. Days turned. 2 weeks. Their life together became quiet but strangely comfortable. Cassian never imposed himself on her life. Instead, he entered it carefully. He made sure she never worked too late without food. He learned how she liked tea and how silence sometimes felt safer than questions. He drove her to interviews when danger lingered in certain streets. He protected without controlling. He cared without demanding return. But he never crossed the invisible boundary. Every accidental brush of fingers sent warmth through her veins. Every time he stood near her, she became aware of how close and how careful he was. She did not know when wanting him stopped feeling like something she should fight and began feeling like something she needed to confront. Then the past arrived to test them. Laia Serin returned to Verona. She was a woman of striking beauty and restless ego, someone who enjoyed commanding attention. People once linked her to Cassian. She found him at a gala, smiled with old familiarity, and greeted him in a way that carried history Mira never knew. Laia leaned too close. Her eyes ignored Mira as something unimportant. Mira expected Cassian to fall easily into old patterns. Instead, he maintained firm politeness and distance. He ended the conversation quickly and returned to Mira like nothing in Laia existed that mattered. Later, Mira asked about Laia. Cassian replied calmly that Laia no longer deserved presence in his life and he did not want her shadow touching Mira. That answer did not erase tension. It transformed it. For the first time, Mira saw that Cassian did not lack emotion. He simply chose carefully where to place it. Something grew between them after that conversation. A slow, quiet heat. One evening, Cassian brushed her hair behind her ear. His fingers trembled for the smallest moment before he stepped back, but it was enough to reveal truth. He desired her. He restrained himself for her. Sake. Rain came one evening with dramatic force. Lightning split the sky. Thunder rolled across the city and ocean alike. Cassian stood near the window staring into the storm while controlling a storm of his own. Mira watched him, heart pounding harder than the weather outside. "Cassian," she whispered. He turned toward her. His gaze carried emotion no longer hidden. His voice dropped, gentle yet heavy with effort. "Do you still want me to keep pretending that distance protects us?" She exhaled like finally releasing something trapped inside. "No," she whispered. He approached slowly, respecting her even in desire. His hand hovered near her cheek. "Say it," he breathed. "Because if you do not, I will remain stone." "I want you," Mira confessed. His control finally broke. Not recklessly, but beautifully. He touched her with tenderness that surprised even her imagination. His lips met hers slowly first, then with warmth that deepened naturally. His hands rested carefully on her waist, pulling her close as though afraid she might vanish. She trembled. Not because she feared him, but because she did not expect passion to feel so safe. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, still giving her power even in intimacy. "Do not stop," she replied. That night, Cassian Vale destroyed every rumor about himself without speaking a single word against them. He did not fail at passion. He simply refused to give himself to anything meaningless. He loved with patience and depth, allowing her to lead, letting emotion build gently until it consumed both of them. She held onto him breathless, whispering for him not to stop because stopping meant losing a world she never knew could exist. Morning sunlight arrived gently. Cassian lay beside her for the first time, asleep with his arm wrapped naturally around her. He looked human in vulnerability, peaceful in a way she had never seen. When he woke, uncertainty flashed in his eyes before relief replaced it. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. "Only that we waited so long," she replied. "Then we will not wait anymore," he said softly. "Life rarely gifts happiness without testing it." Mira's past returned unexpectedly. Adrian Crowe appeared, a writer of words that sounded like poetry and intentions that were anything but romantic kindness. He once clung to Mira with obsession disguised as love. Now he returned with apologies, flowers, and forced devotion. Cassian noticed everything. He noticed Mira's discomfort. He noticed Adrian's persistence. One evening Adrian cornered Mira outside the building, telling her Cassian was a cage and she deserved more than cold restraint. Cassian arrived quietly. He did not shout. He did not threaten wildly. He stood between them with calm power. "Leave," he said. "You do not own her. You do not get to paint yourself as her rescuer. If you continue, I will treat you as a threat, and I am very capable of removing threats." His voice did not shake. His control returned, but this time it was guided by love, not avoidance of it. Adrian left, not humbled but forced to retreat for the moment. That night Mira cried in relief. Cassian simply held her, no demand for thanks, only presence. She whispered that he said love earlier. He nodded. "Yes. You?" Then he confessed everything he once feared. He told her she mattered more than success. Her laughter lived inside him. Her silence frightened him because it meant pain he wished to take away. He loved her not loudly but deeply. She did not answer with words. She kissed him with gratitude and devotion. Life continued. They argued sometimes. They misunderstood sometimes. But they always found each other again because love no longer hid. Verona eventually began whispering differently about Cassian. People saw him smile more. People saw him soften when Mira entered a room. People watched stone become human. Laia eventually saw them again, and finally realized she never truly had his heart. It had always been waiting for someone who could break through without destroying him. On a warm evening under city lights, Cassian wrapped his arms around Mira on their balcony. Wind moved through her hair. Ocean breathed below them. "They once said I could never handle a woman," he murmured near her ear. She smiled, telling him they were wrong. He shook his head slowly and replied they were only right until her love was never about handling someone. It was about honoring them. And she, to him, was the most beautiful storm he had ever seen. She turned, pressed her forehead to his, and promised she would never leave unless he stopped loving her. He smiled softly and told her loving her was the one thing he would never stop doing. Once the world swore Cassian Vale could never satisfy a woman. They believed he would always remain cold. But the truth lived differently. Mira Langford was the one trembling in his arms, breathless, alive, whispering for him never to stop the way he loved her. And Cassian Vale never intended to stop. Before long, Mira began to notice subtle changes in herself as well. She had entered the marriage with armor made of independence and caution, but emotion quietly melted through it. She found herself waiting for Cassian to return home each evening. She listened for the sound of the elevator, the soft steps in the hallway, the moment the door opened. She pretended curiosity when she asked how his day went, but inside her curiosity was rooted in longing, a longing to remain part of his world rather than an obligation tied to his name. Cassian also began to change in small human ways. He once lived with perfect schedules, exact routines, flawless order. Now he found his structure softening around Mira. Sometimes he arrived late to meetings because he lingered at breakfast when she laughed a little longer than expected. Sometimes he allowed business calls to wait simply so he could listen to her describe something as ordinary as a street musician she heard on the way to work. The world once thought he did not feel, yet he was discovering feelings every single day he spent beside her. They began eating together more often. Simple dinners, quiet conversations, moments where two hearts shared space without demanding declarations. Mira loved the way Cassian listened. He did not interrupt. He did not minimize her fears or her anger about the unfairness she sometimes faced as a woman in journalism. Instead, he supported her voice. He told her it mattered. Hearing that from a man others believed insensitive shocked her more than once. Trust deepened slowly. Mira stopped viewing their bond as a cage. She began seeing it as something growing naturally. There were nights when they simply sat on the couch, silently watching the city lights reflect on the glass while listening to wind. Those silences were not empty. They were full. One evening, after a particularly difficult day where one of Mira's articles drew strong backlash from powerful enemies, she broke down unexpectedly. She hated crying in front of others, but Cassian became the exception she did not see coming. He sat beside her, did not tell her to be strong, did not lecture about consequences. He gently placed his hand against her back, steady and warm. For a long time neither spoke. When she finally calmed, he simply said, "You do not have to carry the world alone." Those words wrapped around her heart like comfort she never realized she needed. Intimacy began long before they touched. It began in trust. Cassian also slowly revealed pieces of his past he once hid. He confessed that people called him cold because he learned early that emotions could be weaponized against him. He had watched people use love as leverage and affection as manipulation. He taught himself to remain distant because distance meant survival. By the time he built his empire, the world simply assumed he never possessed a heart in the first place. Mira understood him better after hearing that. She did not see a man lacking humanity. She saw a man protecting scars no one respected enough to acknowledge. And something inside her whispered that loving such a man meant loving strength layered above vulnerability, not weakness pretending to be courage. Adrian, however, did not disappear completely. He lingered in messages and in corners of public places. Mira reported him when necessary, but obsession behaves like a stubborn illness that refuses treatment. Cassian remained patient yet ready to end danger if Adrian crossed the final line. Until then, he respected Mira's independence, even though every instinct inside him wanted to shield her from everything. Meanwhile, Mira's career grew stronger. Her work became bolder. Cassian never stopped her or demanded she soften herself for him. Instead, he often told others proudly about her writing. Slowly, the city began seeing them as a powerful pair rather than a cold arrangement. Cameras captured Cassian smiling near her far more than anyone believed possible. Commentators speculated. Society whispered. But none of their whispers mattered inside the quiet private spaces where love was truly forming. Mira and Cassian traveled as well. They visited old historic streets of Verona together, sharing ice cream on windy evenings like ordinary lovers. They watched street performers, sat on stone benches by the ocean, and sometimes simply walked hand in hand through city life. Cassian was not a man given to public displays of affection, yet holding her hand felt less like display and more like belonging. Their nights grew warmer too. Sometimes they did not sleep immediately. They lay awake speaking softly or resting in silence, feeling each other's breath and warmth. Mira grew addicted to the sound of his heartbeat beneath her ear. Cassian grew addicted to the way her breathing slowed when she finally felt safe enough to fall asleep against him. Safety is rarely spoken of in romance stories, yet it is one of the deepest forms of love. Adrian eventually returned once more in a more confrontational way. He ambushed Mira one afternoon in a quiet bookstore, insisting she listen to him. His words grew sharper. His delusion grew louder. Cassian arrived minutes later because he had developed a habit of ensuring Mira never walked alone in places where shadows might gather. This time Cassian warned Adrian firmly with the finality of a man who did not give threats twice. Security escorted Adrian away. The last piece of unwanted past faded like smoke in the wind. The world outside finally began changing its narrative entirely. Where people once declared Cassian incapable of love, they now noticed his gentleness. Where they once accused him of being heartless, they now saw how deeply he loved in his own way. Many refused to believe love could be both quiet and powerful. Cassian proved otherwise. Mira never forgot the night she truly accepted that Cassian loved her without question. It was not a dramatic evening. It came during a simple storm when power briefly flickered out in their home. Candles lit their space with soft gold. Cassian wrapped a blanket around her, pulled her close, and rested his forehead against hers. There were no grand speeches, just presence, just love. The years stretched ahead of them not as a fairy tale but as a shared journey. They would face struggles. They would argue. They would face future storms. But they would face them together now. That walls had been broken down gently and truth had replaced misunderstanding. Cassian often reflected on how wrong the world had been about him. People assumed that passion always looks wild and uncontrollable, but he knew passion could also be deeply controlled yet intensely real. Mira often reflected on how wrong she had been about love, believing it was something loud or dramatic, when sometimes the strongest love was the one that arrived quietly, held on gently, and refused to leave. Their balcony became a sacred place for them. Countless evenings were spent beneath the open sky, wrapped in wind and closeness. Whenever Cassian held Mira from behind, he silently thanked fate for leading her into his life even through unnatural circumstances. Whenever Mira leaned back against him, she silently thanked fate for proving her wrong in the best possible way. They built a marriage out of respect, trust, passion, and support. What began as contract slowly became connection, then belonging, then love so deeply rooted that neither could imagine life without the other. Cassian Vale did not need to handle a woman the way people once expected. He simply needed to love one completely. And when love finally consumed him, the woman the world thought would remain untouched became the one breathless in his arms, reminding him softly never to stop loving her the way only he could. And he never did. Time moved forward, and with time came deeper layers of love that neither Cassian nor Mira had expected to experience. There were seasons where the ocean became calmer and others where storms rolled endlessly across the horizon. Through all of them, their connection strengthened instead of breaking. Cassian learned to speak what he once only felt. Mira learned to lean on someone without believing it weakened her strength. There was a period when work nearly consumed Cassian again. Old habits resurfaced as major financial storms appeared, threatening everything he built. He worked late into the nights, his body present at home yet his mind buried beneath pressure. Mira noticed his exhaustion long before he did. One night she took his laptop away gently and guided him outside to the balcony. She placed his hand over her heart and whispered that success meant nothing without peace, and that peace could only exist when he remembered he was human and allowed himself to rest. That night, Cassian cried for the first time in years, silently against her shoulder, releasing the pressure he carried alone. Mira was not spared hardship either. A controversial investigation put her in danger when powerful figures sought to silence her. Cassian wanted to lock the world away from her, but instead he stood beside her, ensuring she had safety and support while never silencing her voice. When fear nearly broke her resolve, Cassian reminded her that courage did not mean feeling no fear. It meant choosing truth even while fear breathed against your neck. Together they walked through the storm of threats, and together they came out stronger. Love was not only passion for them, it was partnership. They created private rituals. Every morning she kissed his cheek before work, and every night he kissed her hair before sleep. On quiet Sundays, they cooked together even if neither of them was particularly skilled in the kitchen. They burned meals, complained about flavors, laughed at disasters, and ate anyway because what mattered most was not perfection but togetherness. Cassian began talking more openly about his childhood. How loneliness shaped him. How expectations built invisible cages. Mira listened, never pushing him beyond comfort, gently encouraging him to release the weight of memories one confession at a time. Sometimes she would hold his face in her hands and remind him that he was no longer a lonely boy fighting invisible battles. He was a man loved deeply and unconditionally. Mira also opened pieces of herself that she had hidden. She admitted fears she never allowed the world to see. She revealed the insecurities she buried under bravado. She confessed how hard it had always been to let herself be vulnerable. Cassian listened with undivided attention, his eyes filled not with pity but admiration. He loved her even more for her humanity. The intimacy between them evolved with time. It was no longer only about first discoveries. It became about knowing how to hold her when she was fragile, how to touch her when she craved closeness, how to read the difference between sadness and exhaustion in her eyes. Mira learned his subtleties as well. She learned when silence meant peace and when silence meant struggle. She learned how to calm storms inside him before they consumed him. She learned the small gestures that made him feel cherished. There were evenings when Mira would simply crawl into his lap while he read quietly, resting against his chest, while he wrapped his arms around her. They would stay like that for hours, saying little, sharing warmth and comfort without needing anything more. Love did not always demand fireworks. Sometimes it only asked for presents. They began dreaming about the future together, traveling more, building a family someday, growing old side by side. They spoke about what kind of parents they wanted to be, what kind of home they hoped to create. Cassian promised he would never repeat the mistakes of coldness and emotional distance. Mira promised she would always remind him to live, instead of simply survive. Their story reached far beyond the initial scandalous whispers of their marriage. People eventually stopped judging and started admiring. Friends came to them for advice. Families saw them as proof that arranged beginnings did not always end without love. They became a symbol of how two very different souls could build something beautiful when respect, honesty, and patience stood at the foundation. And always, behind every step of the journey, remained the memory of that first night when walls fell and truth found breath. The night when Mira trembled not because she feared Cassian, but because she never knew being loved could feel like safety and desire entwined. The night when Cassian realized that loving someone did not mean losing control but finally living honestly. Years later, whenever storms hit and life felt overwhelming, they would hold each other and remember where they started. From silence to fire. From contract to connection. From strangers tied together by obligation to partners bonded by unwavering devotion. They would stand again on their balcony where countless memories were carved into wind and whisper. Cassian would wrap his arms around Mira and hold her against his chest while the city shimmered below. He would still sometimes murmur with gentle humor about the rumors people once spread about him. And Mira would still smile, reminding him the world had been spectacularly wrong. He never failed to handle love. He only waited for the right love to handle him. And through every future season, every victory, every hardship, and every quiet moment where love did not need to prove itself loudly, Cassian continued to love Mira fiercely, gently, endlessly. And she continued to choose him, breathless, alive, always grateful she never walked away from the man the world once labeled unlovable. Their story did not end with wedding vows. It lived every day they woke beside each other. It lived every night they fell asleep wrapped in warmth. It lived every time they whispered, "I am here," when the world became too loud. And every time he held her, the memory returned. They once claimed he could never handle a woman. Yet the only truth that mattered was that the woman the world thought would never feel anything with him became the one holding onto him with trembling breath, asking him to never stop loving her as fiercely as he did. And he never stopped. There eventually came a time when life tested them in a way neither business nor enemies could. Mira fell seriously ill for a period. It began with faint weakness, then exhaustion, then days where even breathing felt heavier than it should. Doctors ran tests. Fear crept into quiet corners of their home. Cassian barely slept. The man once known for calm detachment discovered panic, discovered how love makes vulnerability taste sharper than any business failure ever could. He sat by her bedside every single night. He held water to her lips, brushed hair away from her face, whispered encouragement even when his own voice trembled. He spoke softly about every moment they still needed to live together, about places they had not traveled, about sunsets they still needed to stand beneath, about laughter they had not yet shared, on the nights when fear threatened to break Mira's strength. He reminded her that she was not alone in the battle. There was one night she woke to find tears silently streaming down his face. Cassian tried to hide them, but she caught his hand and held it against her cheek. For a moment, roles reversed. She comforted him. She told him She was not going anywhere. She told him he did not need to carry fear alone any more than she did. In that fragile, raw moment, they understood even more deeply that love was not only joy and warmth. It was also choosing to remain when life trembles beneath your feet. She recovered. Eventually, slow at first, then steadily, until color returned to her cheeks and strength returned to her steps. The first morning she walked outside on her own again, Cassian stood quietly behind her, his expression filled with gratitude. He had faced financial storms without blinking, confronted enemies without flinching, but nearly losing her reminded him how human he truly was and how irreplaceable she had become. After her recovery, they traveled, fulfilling promises whispered during fear-filled nights. They walked ancient streets in distant countries. They watched snowfall in quiet towns. They stood beneath foreign skies laughing like children discovering wonder for the first time. Every journey became more than travel. It became celebration of life, of love, of survival. They began new traditions too. Cassian started writing small letters that he left hidden around their home. Sometimes simple words, sometimes deep confessions, sometimes reminders that she was cherished beyond anything he could articulate in conversation. Mira saved every note. She read them whenever the world grew heavy. She began doing the same for him, writing thoughts she knew he might never ask to hear aloud yet needed anyway. Eventually they renewed their marriage privately. Not in a grand ceremony, but in the quiet embrace of their balcony beneath starlight. There were no witnesses, no music, no guests. Only two hearts promising each other again, this time not bound by arrangement but chosen willingly. Cassian promised he would continue learning how to love deeper, softer, braver. Mira promised she would never stop believing in the tenderness inside him even when he faltered. They sealed that renewed promise not with spectacle, but with closeness, warmth, and the peace of knowing their love no longer needed public validation. As years passed, they changed. But they changed together. Lines formed at the edges of their smiles not from sorrow but from countless moments of laughter shared. Their home filled with memories, photographs, souvenirs. Years of mornings and nights stacked gently upon each other like stories carefully archived. And still, through everything, their passion did not fade. It did not burn out. It matured. It deepened. Every time Cassian touched her, it still felt like reverence. Every time Mira rested in his arms, she still felt safe. There were nights when their love felt just as consuming as the storm-driven night when it first ignited, yet steadier, grounded in experience rather than trembling discovery. Cassian often reflected late at night about how fate had given him something he never expected. He once lived in a life of distance, convinced emotions endangered stability. Now he understood something far greater. Love did not steal strength. Love gave meaning to strength. Power meant nothing without someone to share it with. Victory meant nothing without someone waiting to celebrate it. Silence meant nothing when it had no heart to lean against. Mira also reflected often. She once feared love would weaken her independence. She discovered instead that love made her stronger. Knowing she had a partner did not diminish her agency. It enhanced her courage. She wrote bolder stories. She fought for justice with sharper conviction. And every time she returned home exhausted, Cassian was there with steady warmth reminding her she did not have to be unbreakable to be extraordinary. In the later years of their life, when time softened everything except their love, they often sat together on that same balcony where countless memories had been born. Cassian would hold Mira gently, still amazed that the woman who once entered his life as a duty became the lifelong miracle he cherished. Mira would smile, rested against him. Grateful destiny had disguised love as obligation only to reveal something far more powerful. Whenever they spoke about the beginning of their story, they always laughed softly about the rumors people once believed. They remembered how people claimed Cassian could never handle a woman, could never satisfy one, could never love one deeply. They remembered how people pitied Mira for being tied to a man believed incapable of passion. Those memories no longer upset them. They served as reminders of how wrong the world can be about hearts it does not bother to understand. Cassian always ended those conversations the same way. He would lean close and whisper, in a low voice filled with affection, that he never wanted to handle a woman the way the world defined it. He only wanted to honor the one fate gave him. And Mira would respond every time with a knowing smile because she had lived proof of that love for a lifetime. Their love story stretched across years, across storms, across fears, across victories. It was never perfect, never without conflict, but always rooted in respect and devotion. What began as an arrangement transformed into destiny. What began as distance transformed into closeness. What began as skepticism blossomed into a love so deep it carried them through every stage of life. Even when their hair turned gray and hands began to tremble slightly with age, Cassian still held Mira as though she was precious beyond measure. Mira still rested against him as though his embrace remained the safest place in the world. Love did not fade. It deepened. And always, buried like a glowing ember inside their memories, lived that one defining truth. The world once believed Cassian Vale could never give a woman anything worth longing for. They believed he was incapable of warmth. They believed he would remain untouched and untouched by love forever. But reality wrote a very different ending. Mira Langford spent a lifetime in the arms of the man the world misjudged. She spent countless nights wrapped in warmth and longing, countless days filled with partnership and devotion. And whenever she remembered the night everything changed, she still felt the shiver of that first overwhelming closeness, still remembered being the one breathlessly whispering for him not to stop because what they shared was too powerful to lose. He never stopped. Not that night. Not in the days after. Not in the years that followed. Not for the rest of their lives. Because Cassian Vale did not simply learn how to love a woman. He dedicated his life to loving one with his entire soul. And still, life had room for more moments, more expressions of devotion, more quiet proofs of love that no audience ever witnessed. There came peaceful years when nothing dramatic happened, and yet those years meant everything. They hosted friends, supported family, guided younger couples who struggled to understand that love was not built in dramatic gestures but in daily commitment. Cassian mentored young entrepreneurs not just in business but in humanity. He spoke softly about balance, about not sacrificing life for ambition the way he once nearly did. Mira guided younger journalists, teaching them to carry courage without losing compassion. She often told them love did not demand choosing between strength and vulnerability. It allowed both to coexist. She shared parts of her journey to remind them that hearts do not need to harden to survive this world. Even during quieter times, their home never stopped feeling warm. They filled it with music, soft laughter, deep conversations, and occasionally playful arguments that always ended with closeness. Cassian learned to joke more, surprising Mira even after decades with rare humor that appeared at unexpected moments. Mira learned to slow down sometimes and simply exist in a world Cassian helped make peaceful for her. There were visits to places from their younger years, moments spent revisiting old memories with new appreciation. They walked again through streets of Verona where their journey began. The stone walls still stood. The ocean still breathed. But they now saw those familiar places not with fear or uncertainty, but with gratitude. They stood in front of the building where their wedding reception had taken place and smiled at how life had turned something once bound by practicality into something sacred. As the years aged them with gentle hands, Cassian often wondered what might have happened if fate had never arranged their marriage. The thought frightened him every time. Without that arrangement, he might have continued living a life of restrained emptiness, convinced emotions were weakness. Without it, he would never have known the warmth of a life shared, the softness of a heart trusted to his care, or the extraordinary gift of being loved completely. Mira occasionally asked herself the same question. Without Cassian, she would have remained strong and independent, but she would have missed the deeper understanding of partnership that shaped her life into something greater than individual success. She would have missed a love that challenged her, healed her, protected her, and trusted her completely. She would have missed the kind of love that remains even when beauty fades, when loud passion softens, and when only true devotion remains. Together, they built a life full of meaning. They created a legacy not of wealth or fame alone, but of love that defied cynicism, of tenderness that proved strength, of unity that silenced judgment. They became proof that sometimes fate does not give you what you want immediately. Sometimes it gives you what you are destined for, wrapped in doubt first. So you learn to value it when it reveals itself as real love. Toward the twilight of their lives, Cassian would sometimes wake in the quiet of night, watch Mira sleeping beside him, and feel in overwhelming gratitude that words could never carry. He would brush his fingers gently along her hair and whisper thank you to the universe for correcting the lies the world once whispered about him. Because he had never been incapable of love. He had only been waiting for the one heart that truly matched his. Mira would sometimes wake in those same quiet hours and simply rest her hand over his. She would whisper silently in her heart that she was grateful for every moment, every storm, every warm night, every breath they had shared. She knew she had found not just a husband, not just a lover, not just a companion, but the one soul who saw her completely and still chose her every day. And even as time finally prepared to carry them toward the horizon of life, their love never weakened. It remained as strong, as steady, and as beautifully alive as the first moment they dared to trust it. Cassian still loved her with unwavering devotion. Mira still trusted his arms as home. That truth never changed. So when people remembered their story, they did not remember them as merely the couple who married for convenience or the man once rumored incapable of love. They remembered a story of transformation, trust, devotion, and passion that lasted through seasons of joy and hardship alike. They remembered the man who once lived like winter and the woman who discovered the spring hidden beneath. They remembered how the world believed he could never awaken desire in a woman, yet in the end, the only truth that mattered was the one Mira carried in her heart every time she rested in his embrace. She had been the one breathless, trembling, whispering softly for him never to stop loving her, because his love was not cold emptiness. It was warmth, depth, power, and unending comfort. And Cassian Vale never stopped. Not for a moment. Not for a lifetime. Their love endured. Their hearts remained bound. and the world, once so certain of its cruel judgments, faded into silence while their story continued to live far beyond rumor, reminding anyone who heard it that love does not always enter loudly. Sometimes it begins as restraint, grows through patience, strengthens through trial, and shines brightest when the world least expects it. And yet, even after a lifetime together, when history finally began to write their names gently into memory, their love still felt like something breathing. On quiet afternoons they would sit near open windows, letting fresh wind drift through their home, listening to the distant sounds of the city they had shared for so long. They would talk about nothing and everything. About younger years that now felt like stories belonging to someone else. About dreams they once chased and dreams they still held close even as age settled softly over their shoulders. Sometimes Cassian would rest his hand in hers and marvel quietly at how something so simple could feel like the greatest miracle of his existence. He told her often that he never believed in fate until she walked toward him on their wedding day. Mira always laughed softly when he said that, insisting she did not walk into his life to become his miracle. She simply walked into it to become his equal, his partner, and his truth. But Cassian insisted she was all of that and still something beyond words. They spoke often about how people misunderstand strength. Cassian spent much of his life believing strength meant restraint without emotion. Mira spent much of hers believing strength meant never letting anyone help carry her burdens. Together they learned that true strength meant trusting each other enough to be vulnerable. It meant allowing tears when they needed to fall. It meant leaning rather than standing alone in moments of pain. It meant loving without fear of appearing weak. They also learned that passion did not have to fade into memory as time passed. It only changed form. Their closeness remained intense yet more grounded, more mature, more meaningful. Years of shared experiences deepened every touch, every look, every lingering embrace. Their love did not survive because it burned recklessly. It survived because it rooted itself deeply in understanding and choice. There were visits from friends and family who always left their home with warmth in their eyes, reminded that real love did not need to impress anyone. It needed only to be felt genuinely. Many younger couples looked to Cassian and Mira as proof that relationships built on compromise, respect, and commitment could endure even in a world where so many faded quickly. On their final anniversary celebration, long after youth had left their faces, but never their hearts, they stood once more together on their balcony. The city stretched before them. The ocean still spoke in its eternal language. Cassian wrapped his arms around Mira just as he had done countless times before. He rested his face against her hair and whispered the same words he had whispered for years. I love you, in every season, in every version of myself, in every breath I am given. Mira turned gently in his arms and smiled with eyes that still sparkled despite the softness of age. She told him their life had been a gift she would never stop cherishing. She reminded him that he had spent his years proving the world wrong without bitterness, proving that warmth could exist in even the most guarded soul, and that love could grow in places no one expected. And somewhere far beyond public opinion, beyond judgment, beyond every rumor ever spoken about Cassian Vale, there remained only the truth of a love story that did not begin perfectly but became extraordinary through patience and devotion. People once swore he could never handle a woman. They could not understand that he never needed to handle one. He only ever needed to love one with honesty, loyalty, passion, and unwavering heart. And that woman, Mira Langford, remained forever grateful that life gave her not the man people feared, but the man only her heart truly knew. Their story lived long after them in the memories of those who watched it, in the quiet corners of the city that once witnessed their beginning, and in the hearts of anyone who believed love could transform even the coldest fate into warmth. And it will always be remembered for this undeniable truth. The world believed he could never awaken desire or love in a woman, yet it was she who held on to him breathlessly, trembling, asking him never to stop loving her with the depth and tenderness only he could give. He never stopped. And he never would have, even if time itself asked him to.